Charles Fadel. He also joins us from the US. He's a global education thought leader, author, futurist, and inventor. He's the founder and chairman of the Center for Curriculum Redesign. He's also a visiting scholar at Harvard Graduate School of Education and chair of the Education Committee at the Business and Industry Advisory Committee to the OECD. He's the co-author of Four-Dimensional Education, available in 16 languages, and the best-selling 21st Century Skills. He's worked with the education systems and institutions of more than 30 countries. Please welcome Charles Fadel.
Thank you, Lee. Let's see, we want to move this over here. Great. All right, how's the audio? Everyone can hear me? All right. Hello, everyone. So I like to start these presentations that perhaps feel a bit heavy with something lighter, music. So why won't I ask you the following? Recognize the composer of this. So what's your guess? Mozart, what else? Bach, okay, the Bach have it. All right, let's go to painting. Who painted this? Rembrandt, very good. And third, take a look at this painting, and I want you to raise your hand if you feel this is worse than average painting. So no one's raised, so everybody feels this is better than average. Raise your hand to confirm. There's no in between. Either you like it or you don't. Okay. Well, wherever I go around the world, I find the same kind of answer. Roughly speaking, 80% of the audience considers that this is better than average, and 20% consider it as worse than average. Well, there's a common thread through these questions. The music you've heard, the painting you've seen, and even this painting, they were all algorithmically generated, meaning they were generated by math formulas. It's not computer-aided design. It was not a human sitting at a computer and drawing, no. This was drawn by the mathematical formulas. So note that even today, not only can we translate languages, but we can also imitate human creativity. We often think of creativity as being this ultimate refuge for humankind, that nothing's going to reach us there. But no, most creativity is actually quite incremental. And the incremental side, 95% of the total, is imitatable. So in this presentation, we're going to be quickly talking about AI strength and its limitations. I really want to stress the limitations because it's easy to be afraid. But having started an AI company back in 1989, I can tell you there are plenty of cycles of technologies, and they don't always pan out the way you think. But most importantly, what are the implications for education, right? We're educators, we want to see what do we do with all this. So first and foremost, one thing we need to realize is that in spite of all the hoopla, it's really not the algorithms that have gotten better. That's 10% of the reason. 20% of the reason is simply having access to large data sets, which we didn't have back in '89. But the real reason is simply because technology has continued at exponential pace. So microchip technology, an industry in which I participated, grows exponentially, and that's why we get doubling of the processing power and the memory capacity every 18 months. It doesn't seem like anything, but since the beginning of my career, we've seen this change, and that's a million-fold improvement. And now we have supercomputers in our pockets with which we are taking pictures, with chips that used to be on board satellites costing $50,000, and now they cost 50 cents. And of course, you've seen an enormous explosion of interest in AI, and it's being applied everywhere. Speech recognition, speech synthesis, recognitions of all types of things, images, and on and on. And of course, there are billions and billions of dollars being invested. So there's a rebirth of this industry, and of course, it's going to have consequences for all of us. It's going to be very powerful. We can recognize faces. We can also translate. You know, we've all had on our machines now Google Translate, and it makes us wonder, will our friends, the translators in the room, have a job? Sorry. The reality is yes, because we're talking about high-level fluency. But for conversational purposes, you know, going and ask for the key for your room when you're in Beijing, I can do this with my Google phone now or equivalents. Then they can also analyze and synthesize information for us. And we've seen, of course, automated trading that represents about 70% of the total. We've seen e-discovery, meaning going through a lot of legal documents to find the cases that matter to you. And the Washington Post uses also AI to post results of Olympics or things of that nature, simple information very quickly. On the creativity side, you've seen the painting I mentioned, but also there are databases of patents that allow you to see similarities between inventions. So if you look at the propeller blade, it started with 2 blades, then 3 blades, then 4 blades, and now it's double 4 blades. Which object do we all use, both genders, that has gone through the same progression? Shavers, exactly. You're absolutely right. So you could have literally invented ahead of Gillette and gotten the patents yourself. And as David mentioned, AI goes to medical school and now can recognize heart strokes and autism and Alzheimer's and some forms of cancer at the same rate or even better than actual physicians. The one thing it doesn't do quite well is general medicine. Would you like to venture a guess as to why? Partially about feelings, what else? It's a broad scope, right? In narrow specific applications, whether it's X-ray interpretation or even cancer diagnostics, you know what you're looking for, you have the data sets, and it's very, very narrow. In general medicine, you go to your doctor and say, I have a headache. And like, okay. That could be a million different things. And so for broad open problems, it's not quite that easy. And this march of technology continues unabated. It's going to continue on because we're also creating new technologies, new algorithms, like different types of chips. Of course, you've all seen the cloud emerge. We're working on quantum computing that would be a lot more powerful than existing computers. And even the algorithms themselves are seeing improvements. So there are plenty of reasons to believe that this rise in technology, this exponential, hyper-exponential rise, is going to continue. And we're very, very limited with our imagination. It's so hard to figure out what's going to happen next. Back in 1899, Jean-Marc Coté in France was asked, predict 100 years from now, what will year 2000 look like? And that's how he viewed robots. Well, think about it. At the time, the hot technology, the high tech of the times was mechanical engineering. So he thought that's what's going to continue. And then at the time, it was impossible, of course, to imagine that you could have motors be very small and very cheap. So you had to have a maid with a contraption. You fast forward, and you have Roomba. Right? Electronics were even 50 years away from even being fully developed as transistors. And so it was absolutely impossible to imagine this. Well, in exponential times, unfortunately, we are in that situation. really no one can truly predict what's going to be happening in 10 or 15 years from now. I mean, let's be serious. If I had asked you just 10 years ago that you'd have supercomputers in your pocket that allow you to get a Starbucks coupon wherever you walk, would you have imagined that? So the reality is technology has an enormous impact, but it typically takes a little bit longer than we think. So we have a hype cycle, the real work continues, and we had that even in the 80s, and then the work continued, and now it's re-emerging with a vengeance. But it's not all perfect. Technologies all have their limitations, and I'm going to show you the limitations of the machine learning side of AI that David was mentioning earlier, because everyone thinks that these things are unstoppable, that they're perfect, et cetera. Quite the contrary. They have severe limitations, which means they're going to be severely limited in the types of problems they can solve. Well, for one, they're opaque. If a neural net recognizes faces, you really don't know how they've done it. So you're thinking, so what's the point? What's the big deal? Imagine that you're using it to grade a paper, and you have no idea why it gave a student a given grade. Would you think this would be acceptable? Like, I'm not sure. The algorithm said so. Well, who designed the algorithm? Then they need a lot of data. Seriously, a lot of data. And so there are situations where that is possible, like, for example, text on web pages and things of that nature, but it's not always possible. So if you don't have a ton of data, you cannot draw strong inferences. Then they're easily confused. In your opinion, which one of the two is a face? Right? But for a neural net, the two are the same result. They're both faces. They have the same features that my neural net was looking for. It doesn't have context. The system doesn't have any context, no idea of what it's actually doing. It's not conscious. And then it can be a bit brittle. I'm going to show you this funny video just so you show what can happen if you over-tweak a network. So it's made to recognize dogs. And look, it finds dogs everywhere because it over-tweaked. Right? So this should be called cat's nightmare. But literally, you can have them hallucinate because they over-tweak. Then they're also brittle. Again, in different ways, meaning you have to format the data nicely. You cannot just go to a database, suck the whole thing, and say, and good luck to you, find me the patterns. You have to format things. If you don't format it properly, it's not going to recognize things. So it's going to recognize the salad, it's not going to recognize the ragu, because here everything is lined up properly, the data is lined up properly, not in the pan. And then they're shallow. There's very low transfer. So, do you see a dog? Do you see anything else? No? A mop? I don't know. I only see dogs. Where do you see mops? You see a neural net which is tweaked to recognize dogs will see only dogs. No matter how many mops you put, it's going to see dogs because it's trained to recognize dogs. How about here? I only see dogs. Do you see anything else? How about this one? I only see dogs. Do you see anything else? So, yes, they can do amazing things, but they're very, very, very sensitive beasts, okay? It turns out that we're far, far, far more complex than the neural nets that we have designed. Infinitely more complex, quite honestly. Just in one small area of the brain, the hippocampus, we have all these different types of cells, just there. And if you think about how richly interconnected our brains are, it's absolutely mind-blowing. And so there's a vast difference between what we've been designing in terms of neural nets on chips and what our brains are actually doing. Which is not to say that humans are perfect by any stretch. We have a long list of cognitive psychological biases, a long list. And you know that social media and other things pull all sorts of tricks to activate our innate behaviors. So we're not immune to being how can I say, over-tweaked in one direction or another. We too hallucinate. We may not see dogs. We may see all sorts of things that don't exist. So let's not think we're perfect either. It just shows you that the same patterns can emerge out of overstretching a given parameter. So in terms of limitations, I'm going to, in a sense, paraphrase what they've already presented to you. When you have to conceptualize information and do strategic planning, this is a number of different tasks. It's not just one. And it's also the glue between tasks. So you may be able to automate a single task, but not necessarily an entire occupation, as long as the occupation and the task are not just the same thing. And if, as I was saying, if you're dealing with unknown, unstructured spaces, that's definitely a human capability that's here to stay. Then there's the emotional side, the affective side, interacting with compassion and so on. That's going to be hard to reproduce. And then even on the psychomotor side, complex work with high dexterity, that's not necessarily automatable. So yes, this is going to represent enormous change and enormous opportunities for us, but we are still in control if we are willing to remain in control. So now it asks the question, what should we learn for an age of AI? What do you think? Just give me words of what you think an education should be about. Empathy, soft skills, resilience, dexterity. I'm sorry? General skills. Can you be more specific about that?
Not colonel, not captain, general.
Okay. What? Attitudes. Yes? Caring. Algorithm design. Critical thinking. What was that? Math and coding. So what you're saying here is what you hear around the world. In audiences like this, when I ask a question, people come up with A, modern knowledge. Modern knowledge. Not Latin and Greek. We're talking about coding or algorithms or entrepreneurship or things of that nature. Things that are not taught traditionally. Or even in mathematics, it's about algorithmics, not trigonometry. Then you hear about skills and character. And lastly, you also hear about meta-learning, learning how to learn. If we're going to stay ahead, we have to figure out, well, how to reflect and adapt. So if you look at Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain, we have a lot of apps already or software that can mimic pretty much the entire stack. But again, you have to look at this with a grain of salt. It's not that simple. By the way, just saying with a grain of salt, that would have completely freaked out an automated translation system. Then the affective domain. We are working on all sorts of technologies to deliberately fool humans. You know, for elderly people, we're going to have these adorable little robots that come and say, I'm so happy to see you. Whereas your significant other would say, grr, why didn't you take the trash out? And we're going to fall in love with these little things because they're going to be made to trigger human reactions. I was once at a conference on robots, and there was this adorable little robot called Now. And I took it in my arms, and I was just rocking it in front of a group of young women. And they all went, "Aw." imagine if I had then taken it and smashed it on the ground. It's a piece of plastic with electronics inside, but with the right face, with the big eyes, and the cooey little voice, it triggers our emotions. And we're going to be literally designing things to play with our emotions. And then the psychomotor domain, right? Cars, drones, et cetera, et cetera. You've seen a lot of this. So yes, these domains are under attack in a sense, but as I mentioned earlier, as we went through earlier, not everything is that clear cut. So if you don't know what life has in store for you, would it be wise to be as broad and versatile as a Swiss Army knife? Whatever life throws at us, we have a tool, and we can sharpen that tool for the task, but we already have the basics of that tool. Well, this says something about the T-shaped person that David mentioned. Really, it's a Renaissance person. And this is going to sound crazy and preposterous, but imagine if back in the 1850s, we told you, we're going to take you and your children and your grandchildren, we're going to run them through this mass schooling system, and they're no longer going to be peasants. You would have said, really? How is that possible? Taking peasants and making them educated people and doing all sorts of things we cannot imagine as jobs? You're crazy. Well, look at us. So imagine now the next step, becoming all Renaissance humans, being physics experts and painters and poets. And depending on what life throws at us, we adjust and we combine. That's where I think our challenge lies, educating 10 billion Renaissance humans, rather than this being a skill for very, very few people. All of us should aspire to become that, and all our children for sure. If you ask industry, what would you like to see? Yes, the 4 C's of creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. If you also ask industry whether character qualities are going to become important, 48 employer organizations from around the world, representing your countries for sure, have said yes, and only 20% have said maybe. 80% have said yes. And those character qualities are ethics and leadership, are resilience and curiosity, mindfulness and courage. Sorry, went too fast. I'm going to let you absorb this for a second. So yes, it's skills, how you use what you know, but also it's character, how you behave and engage in the world. These are also important for employers. And if you take the ONET database in the US and with the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and you look at the jobs that are growing in large numbers, not just in rate, but rate times number of jobs, that's what we call importance weight demand, you find that knowledge and psychomotor knowledge, cognitive knowledge and psychomotor knowledge, are at the bottom of the list. They're considered necessary, but not sufficient. What goes beyond that are all the skills and character qualities we have, mentioned earlier. So look at resilience. It's at the top. If you don't show up for your work, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are or what you know. That's a number one necessity, and on and on. So these skills and character qualities are considered essential. They're not just a nice to have. And that's how you come up with a framework that brings it all together, right? We looked at frameworks from around the world, 35 frameworks, 111 papers representing 77 sources to come up with modernizing the knowledge side, the 4 C's of skills, the character qualities, and extremely importantly, the meta-learning dimension. Learning to learn, how to reflect and adapt in a world of constant change, learning how to reflect and adapt is at a premium. So I'm going to give you a chance to take a picture of this because there's a download for you if you care to procure this. So you'll get all the details about the framework without me having to go through tons and tons of explanations. Okay? So this is the hard part. We want to teach all these new things, modern knowledge, and also other things. What do we remove? Do we still teach Latin and Greek in most Western societies? Ancient Greek, that is. No. So shouldn't we go through every single discipline and decide, you know what, perhaps we needed this much trigonometry until we invented survey instruments and we computerized things. Perhaps we needed this much geometry when we were drawing battle plans in Greek times. Do we still need this much? Fill in the blanks. And this is where it's so hard to deconstruct because we have politics, we have expert biases, we have all sorts of things that interfere with deciding what do I really have to have. It's a bit like your home budget. You can justify every line item on its own, but altogether, if you have overspent, something has to go. So you may say, well, but I can justify this $200 bottle of wine. Yeah, in isolation. But altogether, you have to make hard choices. And these are the hard choices we have to make. Lastly, in the end, is what we measure that makes the whole difference. I can try to convince 100,000 mathematicians around the world that we should remove some parts of trigonometry, but actually, if we simply change what we test for college and university entrance, that will do the job. If we decide for our own universities and schools and colleges that we don't want some of these old things measured, we don't care about them, and we care about a new set of things, we will change everybody's behavior. This group has a lot more power in its hand to change humanity than it thinks. Scorecards drive behavior. We can change the scorecard, in and out. So that's how we design the future we want. We have it in our power. Thank you very much.